Hey everyone, Duke Nougat 3D here with another mask to review for you guys, and you read the title right, I have another Crunchy Boy in my collection. I don't know how I keep getting these things. I'm like a fucking magnet to these ATs. I don't know why. But this one is particularly special because this is one of the few, if not one of the only ATs in existence that bears a size medium stamp. Why is this particularly special? Because as you may recollect that most ATs, or most World War I US masks in general from the period, used the British numeric sizing system, which went from 1 to 5. But for a brief period in 1918, with some of our Tissot masks, from all I know, just the AT and the KT, we were experimenting with using a small, medium, large based sizing system that didn't really get anywhere past the development. So what I have here is an AT, which is probably my worst condition AT out of the three that I own, but this one, again, is special because it is a size medium, and I'll show off that stamp in a second. If you want to know more about the AT, you can go ahead and check out my other two reviews, several reviews at this point on my channel. But anyhow, let's get right into the review. I'd first like to give a brief shout out to Moulage. Thank you again for helping me secure this thing. He made the partial payment on this, which is typically what we do at this point because it's just kind of our understanding that we kind of collectively both own these ATs, even though they're under my roof currently. But anyhow, thank you again for helping me secure this. Just wanted to get that out there. It's really remarkable how we got it too. The seller of this actually came to us through one of our shit posting pages that we hadn't used in months and was wanting to sell it, and we were originally about to tell him off, but you know, we got lucky this time and didn't go, you know, full open can of whoop ass on the guy, and he literally just did a little bit more digging, and it turns out, wow, he's selling an AT. So anyways, enough about that. Let's get on to the kit, like I said. So first off, let's talk about the M1 style Flutter Valve here, which as you can see is completely detached, as is the norm for these masks. But as you can see, you can get a good look at the three-way seam that really shows how they molded these valves back then. As you can see, it's completely flat and smooth on one side, and then on this side there is a vertical seam running down the length of the valve, and then there's a little folded lip on the bottom that shows how the sheet of rubber was folded in on itself and patched together. Really quite a complex method for making these, and it wasn't really until the 1930s, until the M2 valve came out, where they dip molded the valves, and they were either dip molded or compression molded. I'm not entirely sure which, but they were solidly molded and did not have this multiple layer seam. And you may also be able to notice that it does have its slight brown color still left. Normally these are like discolored black, which is kind of a misunderstanding about World War I Flutter valves. The US ones were always like a red-brown gum rubber color, and the British ones were like a solid orange. Most reproductions I see of these, they are a black color, and that is entirely infactual. They were never black. They were always, with the US ones, again, they were either red-brown, and then the British ones were orange. So moving on from that, we have the repair plaster and instruction card sheet, which unfortunately has sustained some water damage and some paint that bleached off of the filter onto this card. And I haven't actually opened this yet, so I'm going to take a look on the inside and see what it has. Of course, unfortunately, there is no user information because it's actually really hard to find these instruction sheets with that little data record filled out. It's kind of weird, but it is what it is. Just a typical repair plaster and use and information instruction little booklet. Now let's get on to the mask itself, which as you can see is in a state of affairs. First up is the canister, which is the typical green Type J filter, which is pretty rusted but intact, more or less, and it has most of its paint aside from where it's rusting. The hose is petrified, as is typical for World War I era masks, and so is the facepiece itself, which is probably my worst condition AT in my collection. It is completely collapsed in on itself, and the Flutter Valve guard is rusted and bent, and I've went ahead and oiled all the metal parts to make sure it won't rust because I can't currently disassemble anything to apply any oil to them or rust removal. But for the time being, I'm just going to leave it the way it is. And then, as you can see on the forehead, if you can hopefully see that, there is a letter M, which would indicate that this is a size medium. Normally, if you recall my previous AT reviews, these would normally be stamped with a number 3 to indicate medium, but in this case it's an M, so they definitely were experimenting with the various methods of sizing a mask. But it's kind of weird that the small, medium, and large system didn't really come around until after World War II. So very interesting. There's not really too much else to say about it. You can see where the flutter valve would be on the angle tube port there, and you can see the chin seam of the mask, which, even though it is solidly molded rubber, the actual stockinette layer had a seam on the bottom of the chin. You can see most of the rubber strip around the edge to reinforce the stockinette, and you could get a close-up look at the harness tabs and the multi-layer construction and the very, very complicated stuff. And then the harness is also somewhat of an anomaly because the stitching of the head pad is quite different from most examples that I see. With most Type Bs, it will be sewn in a triangular pattern similar to the later M4 style harness used on the M2 and the M2 training and heavyweight and just the M2 series masks in general. But this one is sewn with a much tighter grouping, and then also it does not have any adjustment buckles on the side. So this is entirely a non-adjustable harness that is sewn with a much tighter grouping of the head pad than usual. But it is still a 6-point harness, just like the normal ATs use, just the anomaly of the tighter grouped head pad and the lack of adjustment buckles on the temple straps, as is usual with Type Bs. But other than that, it's pretty much a typical AT. Just the only differences is the weird sizing system and the head harness. And I might as well just show off the carrier because I'm really doubtful that this graffiti that's on the carrier is original, for many reasons. First off, you can see it's stamped April 6, 1917 to September 1919, and if you know anything about ATs like I do, you would know that ATs were never ever carried into combat. As far as we know, they were only issued and used in rear areas in France. They were deployed to France, but they never went to the front lines. They never saw service. So there would be they would pretty much only be issued to specialty personnel for testing, and so they wouldn't really have the chance to scribble all this garbage on the front of the carrier. And this was either, I don't know when this was done. It doesn't look like it was done recently. If it has been done recently, it's very well aged, but this is definitely not original markings. You can just get a closer look at the rest of the markings there underneath the flap. Really not much to say about it. I'm almost certain that they're fake. And then the carrier, interestingly, is one of the earlier pattern M1 carriers. This is the one with the folded gusset instead of the larger rain flaps like my other Type B that I've reviewed before. And then there's really nothing to see inside. It's a very dusty, dirty carrier, so nothing too special about that. You can see the very faint size 3 stamp, and that's actually interesting because you would think that a size M marked AT would have a corresponding M stamped carrier, but I guess that's not the case, or maybe they reissued a different carrier for this. But nevertheless, I'm not saying this is not the original carrier to this mask. It's just kind of interesting how there's a size 3 stamp instead of an M, but I'm not sure if I've ever seen an M1 chest carrier that has a small, medium, large based sizing system as on the external stamps. But anyhow, that's pretty much it. If you have any comments, questions, corrections, or concerns, drop them in the comments below. Thanks again to Moulage for helping me get this AT. This is the 3rd one in my collection so far, and I'll see you all later.